What I'd like to do is just, in the way of an introduction, say a little bit about myself and why I'm here, and then I'll let each of the speakers at the beginning of their talk talk about their particular efforts. But to begin with, I'm very excited and proud to be here with these distinguished people from all of these universities here in our great city of New York. And I've been thinking about what I might say and comment about some of the tasks that you're trying to do and what happened to do with global things. There are at least 2 or 3 global things that I've done in my life, and I know of all the problems that were there. I've anticipated them, so it's easy for me to be an advisor now. I haven't experienced all the different ways of failing. There are new ones, I'm sure, but we've had enough successes that at least my advice is often taken. In general, you'll see that in the program, I hang out as advisor to Coller Capital. That's a $14 billion investment company with interest in almost 2,000 companies around the world. My job as company doctor is in spin-outs of corporations to help high-tech companies. That evolved because I did study at NYU when it had an engineering school, which interestingly enough, it divested, sold, and now it's bought Poly. That was where I went after they no longer had another school. So my degrees are both from Poly and from NYU, which are now one. I guess as part of that, I was asked to come back and see if I could assist in the formation of CUSP. Part of that has to do that I worked at Bell Labs, which is a great place. If any of you have been there, or if you read about it, that was the place to be in the 80s. I started a company called Symbol Technologies, which pioneered barcodes. Barcodes are prevalent all over the place, right? When I started it, they laughed at me. They said, "Never happened. A laser in the supermarket, what are you smoking, sir?" And that was 1972. And so my wife and I and a third fellow, Jerry Swartz, embarked on this great thing. I asked them, what's the business of, why are you doing this? He said, IBM came to us with a barcode. They said, if you use this, you'll be able to do inventory control. And you're operating off of 1% or less profit. The number of turns per year is critically important. Think of a supermarket as a browsing warehouse. The sins are 2. If you go to a shelf, looking for something and it's not there, that's sin 1. If you go to a shelf and it's stagnant and nothing's moving off of there could be a Me Too that sells, that's a sin 2. We're going to eliminate that with barcodes. Anyway, that story has been played. It's now part of Motorola Solutions, is mostly Symbol Technologies. They paid a nice price for it, about $4 billion. So went on to do the other side of the table, which was venture capital. Venture capital, looking at things and new propositions to fund new companies. And I formed something called Poly Ventures. So Polytechnic was the first university. I formed my fund at the university, had an opportunity to have lunch with my advisors, and then go and invest in companies. So we did about 40 companies around the world. Took me all over the globe in doing startups. And a whole different thing. You're betting on other people. You can't make the final decision. The first time, they're all there, okay, yes, sir, yes, sir. Then you give them the check, and then it's no, sir, no, sir. But in the evolution here, I thought of another project that I worked on in space. And most of you don't know about all the microgravity research that was done on the shuttle fleet, and in cooperation with Mir and the Russians, was in a laboratory in an otherwise empty cargo bay that did something good when it put up the space observation, but it didn't have anything for people, humans, to do anything. So we built labs that went in there called Space Hab. You probably never heard of it. 18 missions, 6 years, all the microgravity research, in cooperation with all the agencies around the world, were done there. So the challenges of that are enormous, and I won't go into it, but I think about what we have to do here, and I've heard all the policy issues, the governmental issues, and everything, but sitting here as a panel of people that are going to address the sciences, and it really is wonderful that we had an effort here and a mayor that backed it to put these to work as our applied sciences campuses. And hopefully we will figure out how to do it right. Our partners around the world, and all of us have different partners around the world, will learn from us and teach us. And hence it's a forum, and like this is a forum. So I'm really just going to stand back, let these gentlemen and gentle lady over here speak, and then I guess at some point we'll have a question and answer, and I'll try to moderate that and insert some questions. One of the questions I had before that I didn't ask had to do with this trillions of dollars. That sort of sparked me right over. I said, what are the business models of all these companies that will enable them to be here 3-4 years from now and generate trillions of dollars? I'd like to know the formula. But okay, let me do the following. Let me have each person introduce themselves, their institution, and what they're doing. And then we'll sit down together and we'll have a Q&A. Thank you.
I'm Dan Huttenlocher. I'm the Dean of Cornell Tech, which is Cornell's new campus here in New York City, which is together with our campus is, as initially envisioned, transnational by nature. We have the Technion Israel Institute of Technology as our academic partner in the creation of the campus. I was part of the initial team that put Cornell's proposal together to the city of New York, and I moved down here after we were awarded the award by the city. And I've been living here in New York City since then. So Cornell Tech is this project to build a new campus on Roosevelt Island, but we're already up and running in space that Google has nicely donated for use. If you just hop on the ARC trains for here, it's a pretty direct route to the Lower West Side. And the overall campus is the home of an interdisciplinary institute, which is our partnership with Technion. And so I'll talk a little bit both about the campus overall and the cross-university partnership, which is at the core of the campus. So our goal is nothing short of redefining graduate education and research for the digital age. We're looking at a set of programs around the digital disciplines. That's the focus of our campus. And it approaches that, in addition to the traditional kind of fundamental academic excellence that one expects from leading universities, also emphasize creative and business thinking, entrepreneurial thinking, and building things. So this campus is both about fundamental research, and it's also about building things and using them in the world outside of academia. So in some sense, I view my role as the dean of this campus as being one of bringing together different approaches and different cultures that often don't play all that well together. So there's the culture of academic excellence and leadership. There's the culture of business and entrepreneurial success. And often those, the interface between those is often extremely narrow. In my more pessimistic moments, I'll say that the only place that academia and companies agree with each other is around recruiting of our graduates, and that everything else can be window dressing. And our goal really is to fundamentally change that on this campus and to look for the ways that we can work as partners between companies and this new campus. And we're interested in being a model. So anything that we develop, we're sharing with others. In fact, already some of the work that we've done around intellectual property agreements for the way our student projects work, we've made public, and some other universities and companies are already starting to use them. So our goal really is to help improve the technology ecosystem in New York and nationally and globally. As I said, building things is a very important piece of our approach here. And taking advantage of the fact that we're in New York. And so that has myriad kinds of implications and manifestations. But one that's of particular importance to us is engagement with the K through 12 and public school system. So that's something that we've already started doing, looking at the educational pipeline much earlier on than graduate school or undergraduate. So to me, there are three broad aspects to our approach, one of which is really rethinking graduate education and research for this new age. And I think the best way to think about that is if you think about an engineering school, what we're doing is simultaneously broader and narrower than engineering. So because we're focused on the digital disciplines, there's a lot of engineering that has nothing to do with digital technologies and software, so we're narrower. But at the same time, when you look at the digital age, the social sciences, design, business thinking are all very, very important to have as integrated parts of what is going on the campus. And so that's the way in which we're broader than engineering. This notion of really rethinking how academia and industry work together, I think, is probably best illustrated by analogy. If you think about how companies work with each other today in partnership, that is radically different today than it was 10 or 15 years ago. The whole notion of what a supply chain looks like or what the relationship between a company and its customers look like has been completely changed by information technology over the last 10 to 15 years. Yet if you look at the way that academia and industry work together, it looks almost the same now as it did 10 or 15 years ago. We haven't taken advantage of those kinds of changes that have happened in the business world. And that's what we look to do, but to do it in ways that are appropriate, not just copying how supply chains have changed. And then our basis of our campus is this integration of discipline-based fundamentals and interdisciplinary breadth. And the interdisciplinary programs are our partnership with the Technion, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. The Jacobs Institute is the home of the interdisciplinary parts of the campus. So for us, this is set against two underlying trends, one of which is the fact that the whole landscape of the technology sector, both nationally and globally, is changing very quickly. Mass urbanization, changes in how technology is developed, and those are all things that we believe favor development of new approaches to technology development that are particularly well suited to New York, where almost every industry and every aspect of culture is present here. And so technologists can work closely with people who are experts in various domains. The other change that's important is not just what's going on in the world outside, but what's going on in the academic world, where the whole set of criteria for academic success are broadening. And engagement with commercial enterprises is now increasingly an important piece of academia's own internal assessments of success. And those two things together, we think, are trends that really will make some of the kinds of changes that we're looking at be things that are achievable today and tomorrow. So our academic partner is the Technion. So Cornell is responsible for developing the overall physical campus, and all of the discipline-based programs and discipline-based degrees on the campus are Cornell degrees. And then working with the Technion, we're developing an interdisciplinary institute and a set of interdisciplinary degree programs that will result in dual degrees. So students in those programs will get both a Cornell degree and a Technion degree. And of course, there's a huge research component to these interdisciplinary areas as well. It's not just about education, and that's also part of the institute. So there are the three interdisciplinary areas that we're focusing on at Cornell Tech overall and at the Jacobs Institute are what we call connective media, healthier life, and the built environment. And each of those three areas is about the information layer on other domains. So when we say connective media, it's information technologies in media. When we say healthier life, again, it's the IT cut on healthier life. So not the biotech pharma side, but the information side. And similarly for the physical world, the built environment, it's the sensing and controls and planning and intelligence part of the physical world. So from a discipline-based perspective, we have this core set of disciplines at the middle of this diagram that are largely the engineering and technical disciplines underlying the information age: computer science, electrical engineering, information science, operations research, and the business school. And those are all programs that Cornell is developing as Cornell degrees in New York City. And then we have these three interdisciplinary programs around the physical world, health, and the media world that pull in a whole bunch of other disciplines, and those are the things that we're doing in collaboration with the Technion. So it's a mix of discipline-based and interdisciplinary programs. So I just thought I'd close showing you a little bit about the site. So this is the site on Roosevelt Island, which we took possession of from the city right at the end of last year, so in December, just about a month ago. What's currently there is an old decommissioned hospital. That is being demolished as we speak. But demolishing 800,000 square feet is a long task, so the demolition itself will be a year or more. But we will start construction on this new campus while the demolition is happening. So the demolition will proceed from the north to the south end of the site, and we will start construction late this calendar year to open in the summer of 2017. And what this is showing is a rendering of the first academic building, which is the sort of bronze-toned building in the front, and the corporate co-location building, which is the one in the back, that's towards the Queens side. The academic building's about 150,000 square feet. The corporate building's about 250,000 square feet. And this is just a ground level rendering showing from what will be permanent open space on the campus, the first two buildings, academic building and corporate co-location building. And this open space, just to give you a sense of scale, is about the size of Bryant Park in Manhattan. So the campus is an open campus, not fenced in, connects the two sides of the East River to each other. And we're very excited about the nature of both the academic and commercial and publicly accessible spaces that will be on this campus. So with that, I'll, right, so quickly timeline, right, there was one last thing. So we're up and running, as I said. We had our first students just graduate who started about a year ago. That was a handful of students in our Masters of Engineering and Computer Science. We've just announced 2 new programs, a 1-year MBA for students for people who have tech sector backgrounds, and the first of the dual degrees with the Technion in the connected media space. So those will start next fall. At that point, we'll have 3 master's programs, computer science, MBA, and connected media. And then going forward, 3.5 years from now, we'll move to Roosevelt Island. And by that point, we expect to have 300 or more full-time students and 30 or more full-time faculty, plus a number of part-time and other sorts of faculty, and many, many dozens of researchers and people from companies stationed on the campus.
Good morning. I'm Steve Coonan, and I'm the founding director here at CUSP. We came into existence about 2 years ago, and let me just start by welcoming you all belatedly to this space. If you get a chance, when we're finished, take some time to walk around and understand what a wonderful place this is to be working in, the views of the city, the lights, and so on. So let me spend a little bit of time telling you about CUSP. I have no charts. CUSP is a mission-driven research and educational partnership aimed at fusing big data with big cities, and in particular, this city. The first panel, I think, this morning articulated very well the rationale for bringing big data to big cities. I have some other remarks I'd like to make about that, but I'll do that during the panel discussion. So research and education, that's kind of obvious. One understands what that means, and I'll go into a bit more detail about what CUSP is doing in both of those spheres. But mission-driven is perhaps a bit unfamiliar. We aim not just to be relevant for the needs of New York City in terms of the impact of big data, but also to directly have impact, which means that we need to entrain a set of partners that are a little bit different from a traditional academic operation. We have, first of all, university partnerships, Carnegie Mellon, Toronto, City University here in New York, Warwick, very important partner for us in the UK, and IIT Bombay are partnered with NYU. It used to be NYU and Poly, but now they've merged, and so it's NYU, in realizing this. We have a set of corporate partners. Microsoft, IBM, and Xerox are the major partners. National Grid and Con Ed, very important for data in New York City, are also partners, as is Lutron, a private corporation that makes about 40% of the world's lighting controls, including the lights that they've given for the space here that we're in. And then many of us have come from other lives and know the national laboratories very well, and we've brought in as partners the national labs, Brookhaven, the local lab, Los Alamos, Sandia, and Livermore as partners. These are unparalleled organizations in their abilities to handle data, to acquire data, and to do simulation. And then finally, most importantly, we're partnered with the government agencies of New York City. The city government itself, 13 of the agencies, from buildings and environment to fire and police and everything in between that you might think is relevant to the city operations. Together with the now famous Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. We could have helped, actually, had we engaged. And also the MTA that runs the subways, the buses, the commuter lines. And the ambition and challenge is to put all of these organizations together. As Dan said, there's some cultural blending, or at least cross-cultural education that's going on as we go about this, to execute real projects in the city that will have an impact on the government and citizen lives. Let me talk a little bit about the research and how we're realizing that. I'm not, and we can go in again in the questions, for all the challenges. Back up for a second. As you may see from my bio, I spent about 30 years in academia as a faculty member and as an administrator. another 5 years in the private sector in a big company, and then 3 years in the federal government. And so anything I might say that's disparaging about any organizations like that comes from some degree of familiarity. When I was in academia, we talked about problems. When I was in the private sector, we talked about challenges, I learned to say, not allowed to say the word problem. And in the government, I learned to say opportunity. Federal government. Research. You know, we don't want to be just another academic department. And what I learned in my experience in the national labs is you've got to have unique facilities or capabilities that really differentiate you and contribute to the mission. We're standing up 4 of them in CUSP. One is the data warehouse, which I like to describe as the omnivorous ingestion of all manner of data about New York City. We have a close partnership with the city that gives us access to city data. We have private sector partners who have data about New York City. And we have projects underway, I'll describe a couple in a moment, that generate our own unique data sources. As you build such a capability or facility, you need to worry about data security, data interoperability, and most importantly, as came up this morning already, privacy. And we are working and hope to be a model for how one goes about in doing that. The second facility is the Urban Observatory. You can walk around here and perhaps see some examples of that. We believe that there's a lot of potential in applying the technologies of remote sensing from the tops of big buildings in a city. Cities are unique in A, that they have tall buildings that are urban vantage points, if you like, and B, they have a lot of people within a relatively close distance. One sensor on top of the Empire State Building can see within 10 kilometers of order 1 million people. See in quotes, is within range. And so there's a lot that can be done in that direction, and we are doing already. A third capability, Peter mentioned, you know, the city is like weather, and you should be able to simulate it using the daily patterns to constantly improve and refine your predictive capability. We are embarked upon that. Transportation is the foundation, agent-based modeling, but then you can go on to layer economics, health, energy use, communications, and so on. Really interesting intellectual challenges as well as great practical value for understanding the city, taking its pulse, understanding how it responds to minor or major perturbations. And then finally, the fourth, and in some ways people find a very interesting facility, is the so-called quantified community, a slice of the city of order 5,000 to 10,000 people, where you fully instrument the environment, the infrastructure, and the people, with their permission, of course, to understand all sorts of exciting things. And I think within a couple of weeks, we'll be making a major announcement about how we hope to bring that into being within the next calendar year, at least as a start. A couple of other capabilities that one needs are, first of all, the ability to analyze social media or new media. And this is, of course, a new research area. Many people are working on it. The question is, can you harness it for practical application? And then finally, citizen science. I think we heard a little bit about it this morning, that the citizens of the city, for whom the city is constructed and who operate it, are both customers for the data. They're also sources of the data and ways in which they can help with the data analysis. And so learning how to engage the citizenry in what we're doing is something that's also very important to us. There are a slew of other things that we're doing, projects, sound, building energy efficiency, applying modern environmental metagenomics to understanding what's going on in the sewers, and by that sampling nutrition, public health, drug use, and so on. You know, basically some of what we're doing is physical scientists and engineers looking at the city and asking how can we acquire information about it and use it in many different ways. We are intensely interdisciplinary. I like to say we go from sensors to sociologists. We have a number of people that we are in training who have worked in the city in real positions of responsibility. And they're very useful for us as we go about thinking about what projects we want to do and how we can have our projects have real practical impact on what the city is doing. Let me say a word about education, and then I think I'll close. We started last August a class of 24 for a one-year master's program in applied urban science and informatics. It's a hybrid curriculum between informatics disciplines, databases, sensors, modeling, GIS, visualization, and so on, and urban domains, transportation, energy, health, and so on. The students get a mix of instruction like that and then work on a project or two that is, again, a real project expected to have impact in the city. The class has been off this last week in Singapore. At least half of them have, understanding how that particular smart city works, and I think they're due back soon and look forward to hearing what they have learned. You know, aspiration in the end, within 10 years, to have figured out what this thing urban science really means, from the very basic science all the way through to how you have it have a real impact in city life and city operations. To have stood up a center that practices that with these anchor facilities, to have trained a couple hundred people in this field, to have generated some technologies and commercialized them either through startups or large corporate partners. Frankly, to have also revolutionized the social sciences. I think that's one of the I think, gaps that struck me this morning in the discussion. The most interesting and problematic aspect of cities are the people. And what I heard a lot about this morning, again, no offense to anybody because I'm part of that also, is a set of engineers, physical scientists, and policy geeks talking about it. And I think we need to have much more voice of ethicists, sociologists, political scientists engaged in these conversations, because that's really what the cities are about. It's the people. We can revolutionize the social sciences. If you're a social scientist, you usually get your data by taking a survey of 1,000 people, curating the data, and then doing whatever you're going to do with it. We have technologies now that give us almost real-time data on 1 million people at once. It's not perfect, but it's a very interesting complement to the more detailed traditional methods. And then finally, through our current international partners and other interactions, we'd like to start to propagate this idea and this brand out to other cities. Of course, there are already discussions going on in London. In a couple of weeks, we'll have people here from Chicago and Boston and London talking about how we might carry this similar spirit out to other cities. So that's a little bit what we're about. There's a lot more information out on the websites, and happy to talk both during the panel discussion and individually. Thanks.
Well, thank you, CUSP, for this opportunity to attend this event and update everyone about Columbia University's Institute for Data Science and Engineering, which was founded about 18 months ago under the New York Applied Sciences Initiative. My name is Patricia Culligan. I'm the Associate Director of the Institute for Data Science and Engineering. I'm also a professor in the Department of Civil Engineering and Engineering Mechanics at Columbia University. I'm a member of the Earth Institute, and I co-direct the Urban Design Lab for the Earth Institute. Our institute actually is truly interdisciplinary. It encompasses faculty from across 9 schools of the university, going from engineering to sociology to policy to public health. The institute is going to be housed in 44,000 square feet, which we're currently renovating. And we've committed over the next 5 years to hire an additional 30 faculty beyond the ones that are already engaged to buttress the research and the teaching and the industry engagement that is going on within the Institute. We currently have 56 founding faculty in the Institute that have official appointments, and we have another 124 faculty across the university that are affiliated with the Institute because they're very interested in being engaged in what we do. So there's close to right now 200 faculty that are working in the space of the data sciences and engineering. We've started an industrial affiliates program. We really want to ensure that the research and education that is being moved forward by this initiative is actually informed by industry needs, industry goals, and industry desires to meet some of the goals of the New York City's Applied Science Initiative itself. And we have right now we have 40 graduate students engaged in our inaugural certification program. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But this certification program, which was designed from the bottom up, it has 4 new courses, was actually only approved by the university at the end of April last year, and we had so much interest in it, we were able to actually get 40 students into the program by September, just in a few months' time. And I think that speaks to the interest that we're seeing out there among the younger generation in getting engaged in this sort of data-driven analysis and data-driven approach to solving some of the many problems that we have as a society. So we designed the Institute to focus on 5 key sectors that are important to the economy of New York City, and we have them housed in 5 different centers. And we also have what we call a Foundations of Data Science Center, which is a horizontal initiative that cuts across all of these 5 key sectors. So in our Smart Cities Center, we're interested in the role of data, as we heard in the previous panel, in making our cities safer and more resilient. We have a very big focus in this particular center on sensor development and deployment, and deploying the sensors around New York City, particularly on our aging infrastructures, to understand the interconnectability between the infrastructure systems, to understand the behavior of the infrastructure systems, and to be able to manage better our aging infrastructure, which is a problem that many of us face in the global north. Our new media center is actually looking at how data is totally upending the way that we communicate as a society. What does that mean to us as a society, and what are the advantages that we can take from this revolution? And an example project we have in our new media city is the real-time mining of social data during events like Superstorm Sandy to really understand how individuals and communities are being impacted around the city by events like that. And can we learn from that and then develop strategies to ensure that when another superstorm comes our way, we're actually prepared to put resources, target resources when they're actually most needed. Our Health Analytics Center is looking at the power of data to improve anything from personal to global healthcare. And an example project that we have in this particular area is meshing data mining with clinical trials data to really understand the impact that certain drugs that are being introduced onto the market have on different communities. And it turns out that we're uncovering that in some cases, these new drugs are actually able to manage healthcare problems of 10% of the population very well, but do absolutely nothing for the other 90% of the population. And if we can understand that, we can be smart about where we're targeting this drug delivery, and we can save money by not prescribing drugs to populations that are really not going to benefit from that particular prescription. Our Financial Analytics Center is interested in the role of predictive analytics to improve market stability and to grow new markets and to grow the economy, as we heard in the first panel in that particular area. We're using natural language processing to try and understand better consumer preferences and how consumers value different products as one example project in that particular area. And finally, our cybersecurity center, and this could actually be a cross-cutting center too, because I think the issue of national and cybersecurity really cuts through all of these key sectors. So we're really looking at data security and issues of privacy. And an example project we have in this area is trying to develop advanced encryption tools to try and keep the data that is collected in the cloud and stored in the cloud more secure. So better partitions between data sets that are actually being stored remotely. The Foundations of Data Science Center actually has two thrusts. One thrust is the Foundations of Data Science itself, probability, statistics, exploratory data analysis, data visualization, machine learning, et cetera. So the tools of data science that can be applied to these data sets and hopefully be used to extract information that is actually valuable to us. But the other part of the center is actually looking at the hardware. So basically, can we develop smarter fiber optic techniques that can ensure that the data get to your desktop and get to your desktop faster? And can we look at new models for future data centers, which actually consume massive amounts of energy right now, and that's not something that's really sustainable into the future. So really looking at the way we deliver and store data So that's the two pieces of the foundations of the data science. And in each of these centers, we have interdisciplinary faculty steering committees that come from the 9 schools that I showed on the previous slide. So as I mentioned before, it truly is an interdisciplinary institute. Talking about the education programs, so I mentioned the graduate certification. It's a 4-course certification. Each of the courses was designed from scratch. They're specifically targeted at the population that is coming into the certification program. It's quite fascinating looking at the applications that we received. We have people that had prior master's degrees that were interested in how the certification could advance their career. We had people in government organizations that were interested in how they could get the training that they needed to do some of the work that we heard about in the first panel. We had people that came with medical backgrounds, MDs, that were really interested in what this is meaning to the healthcare industry. Many of the people in the program are part-time. They're working professionals, and they're really just doing this to understand what's happening in this field and to be able to go back into industry and apply the techniques that they're using. Our MS in data science, we also designed from scratch. It's 10 course. All of the courses but one is new. It's gone through our university approval process. We're now hopefully sending it out to the state for state approval. We hope to launch it in fall 2014, but that is contingent on state approval. But looking at the applications that we've received, and the application deadline for this is actually a month away. We have over 400 applications for this particular program. So again, I think that speaks to the interest that we're seeing in these areas that each of the applied science initiatives is focusing on. And we're now working to develop executive education programs. There's a lot of interest from our industrial affiliates in this particular area. So trying to train people that are not going to be data scientists, but need to understand how data might be transforming their industry, aimed at that particular level. I have two more slides to finish. I just wanted to talk a little bit about collaborations that we're developing with EU partners, because the TTIP was the focus of this particular event. One of our industrial affiliates is Synergic Partners. It's a Spanish data science consulting firm, and actually we're working with them on the executive education there. That's actually been their main focus. We actually was a founding partner in what was a large data science institute proposal with the University of Amsterdam. And I think it was actually quite fascinating that the city of Amsterdam launched a similar initiative to the New York City Science Initiative as a way of thinking about advancing science and technology in their city. And so we partnered with them on a proposal that made it through the first round and didn't make it through the second round, but it started the discussions with them, and we're hoping that this collaboration can move forward in a different forum. And finally, we've been talking to the University of Glasgow, who has a Smart Cities initiative, and I think they're moving towards the sensing of the urban environment, which many of us are doing here in New York, and we're trying to see if there's any collaborations that can be fruitfully engendered in that particular area. And finally, I'm just going to be very quick here, because this could come into the discussion here, but I was thinking about what opportunities we might have through collaborations with the EU when we start thinking about science and technology and the academy and the industrial relationships that the New York City institutes are trying to found. And I think we could be innovative about really thinking about joint graduate and professional training programs. The Erasmus Mundus program in the European Union is a great model, where students start at one university in the European Union in one country and go to another university and get their degree. It would be great if we could actually do this transatlantically. Shared resources is an obvious point, and I think this will come out in the discussion. And finally, I think really moving to intergovernmental funding opportunities. Those of us in the US can get funding from the NSF, National Science Foundation, to do work in Europe, but none of the money can go to Europe. The Europeans can get money to do work in Europe, to do work in the States, but none of the money comes to the States. If we really had a fund that crossed the Atlantic, I think the progress we could make in this particular area would be phenomenal. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Thanasis Rikakis. I'm the Vice Provost for Design, Arts and Technology at Carnegie Mellon University. And I'm supervising the CMU Integrative Media Program that we'll be establishing in New York City at Steiner Studios with support from the city, the Applied Science Initiative. So our initiative is very much focused on the intersection of technology and the arts. Carnegie Mellon University is a unique place that has top 10 ranked units in computer science, engineering, and all of the arts and architecture and design. We've been doing work in the intersection of those areas for many years. And we have, for example, 8 concentrations in the undergraduate curriculum, the blue little boxes there, that are available as liberal arts offerings to any undergraduate. There are tech arts concentrations in those spaces. And we have over 10 master's degrees that merge technology and the arts. Many of you might know our human-computer interaction masters, the first human-computer interaction masters in the world, actually, that merges computing, design, and social sciences. So this is one of our strengths, and one of the reasons of coming to New York is that we want to create a pipeline for our technology, our strengths, to New York City, because we feel, of course, New York City is a cultural capital, is a media capital, but at the same time, very clearly a growing force in technology. So we've chosen 5 master's programs, which are up in the green boxes over there, for which we're going to create pipelines into New York City. And the core of that is going to be an emerging media degree, it's a new degree we're creating, especially for this initiative, that's going to have an MA path out of the College of Fine Arts, an MS path out of Computer Science, a Men's path out of Engineering, and a Master's of Management out of the School of Business and School of Public Policy. And so people will be able to come to Pittsburgh in any of those paths, stay for a year, get their disciplinary chops together, and then spend a year or a semester in New York City, very close to what I heard from my colleagues here, working on applied projects in partnership with industry or community, or why not some of the other universities here who are doing similar work. So we're creating this new degree across the university and creating this pipeline for that in New York City. And some other tech arts programs are going to have a very similar structure of 1 year in Pittsburgh and 1 year in New York. Is our urban design program, which is a program across architecture, engineering, and public policy, again, with relations to a lot of what I've been hearing this morning. We're bringing an integrated innovation in products and services master program here, which is about how to innovate by bringing together engineering talent, design and arts talent, and business talent. We're bringing, of course, our game design program. The Entertainment Technology Center, one of the first places in the country to offer a game design master's. So we're bringing that here across computer science and the arts. And we'll also be bringing a number of residencies out of the different degrees that we have in technology and the arts. So that program is going to be producing around 50 students per any given semester, and anywhere between 5 and 8 faculty that will be here either on a permanent basis, on a rotating basis, at Steiner Studios across those areas, working on this idea of integrated media, especially applied ones, like you heard from our other colleagues. So that's a short-term goal. We're starting our hub at Steiner Studios in 2015, and by 2017 we're going to be, as I said, to about 50 students per any given semester, about 6 or 7 faculty, some permanent staff we're going to have there, and so on and so forth. However, there was another reason that attracted us to New York, which is a long-term goal. And the more I'm hearing this morning, the more I feel that there's tremendous synergy opportunities. As some of you might know, Steiner Studios, largest studio for film and television outside of LA in the world, and one that is growing. They're about to build a backlot, more television studios, and they've also started the development of the old Naval Hospital to be a media campus. So what the Steiners were thinking, and by the way, David Steiner is a CMU alum, so that's the connection there, but also we work with Dago on a number of things. So what they're thinking on the back, where just the Naval, we see the Naval Hospital, they were thinking about creating a media campus specially focused on things like special effects, post-production, performance capture of big scale, which we really don't have in New York. There's a lot of it in LA, Vancouver, Singapore, of course, but a really high-end facility that can do that doesn't exist in a large-scale one, doesn't exist in New York. So for example, Spider-Man shot at Steiner Studios, but it didn't do special effects here. So one of the ideas we were discussing with the Steiners was, okay, we are in an amazing place to try and do a media campus that works on special effects. But how is that going to differentiate? How are we taking on LA or Vancouver or Singapore? And the idea we came up with was that, okay, we are in the cultural capital of the world. We don't want to replicate some of the, the commercial work that's happening in other places. What we can do is we can really take this opportunity of bringing technology and arts together to really, innovate culture and say, okay, what is the next large-scale immersive experience that we can create special effects for? Right? You look at every village, it has a square. People want to come together, right? People go to movies because it's big scale and they come together. They go to theaters, to drama. So what if we were to say, okay, we're going to do a special effects program for the next level of the immersive experience, right? Of course, that could be film, but it could be expanded drama. There's tremendous knowledge in drama. What about participatory drama? How about 10 years from now, if BAM has all its participatory drama with digital effects in it? What if we can think of Union Square as the next stage for immersive collaborative experiences, right? Where people come with their mobile systems and they participate in a huge immersive experience. What if we can put in that campus big decision simulators for making decisions, participatory decisions, the kind of decisions I was hearing here about what happens if the waters go up? What kind of behaviors do we have around the city that help or contribute to the waters going up, and so on and so forth? So while we're thinking with the Steiners about, yes, a special effects campus, but one that is really innovating culture, is thinking about the next stage of the immersive large-scale cultural experience, it became very obvious to us that, hold on a second, there is a synergy here with the other campuses. As you heard, every one of them is doing media at some point. So what about a New York City media campus, not a CMU media campus at Steiner Studios, but a New York City media campus at Steiner Studios, where with each of the other 3 applied science initiatives, we synergize on our areas of strength. For example, we don't have a film school at CMU. NYU, Columbia have great film schools. We have some very strong synergies on machine learning with Cornell, and so on and so forth. So that's an opportunity to just think about that, an opportunity to think about synergy. And of course, if we do that, right? So you're thinking, why would industry come here? If industry has this big campus in New York City with access to all this tremendous cultural capital and 4 different programs that are contributing to a joint master's program with different paths, that will be the kind of thing that can bring industry here, because they can't do this in Singapore. If you're going to innovate culture, if you're going to think of the next paradigms in large, immersive, participatory cultural experiences, New York City is a place to do it. And having 4 great institutions working together might be something very attractive for industry. Continuing on this idea, and because the idea of also connecting to big data. So you're thinking tech arts, what does that have to do with big data, right? Well, of course, the idea of bringing tech and arts together, as I said, can be a strength for New York City, because great technology, great arts, but it can leverage big data. I've been hearing a lot this morning about all the great things that big data can do, but then it has to interface with people. Steve brought that up. As the morning was going on, I began to hear more and more about people. I was very happy about that. I was very happy to hear Steve talk that it is about people. So you need to interface this data with people. That will happen through media. And in the end, like Steve brought up, and many of you guys brought up, in the end, life is only as good as the people who live it, right? So the reason to have big data is to make the people better, not to make the data better, right? So we need to ask the question, are we making the people better? Right? I heard paradigms like, let's control the lights, let's control the traffic. Okay, how are you going to control that? Like through this amazing system? Or is it about people being able to actually be better in controlling traffic, in controlling energy, and so on and so forth? So a tech arts media level on top of big data can bring not only the what and the how, but also can bring the why. And the why has to be human-centric. It has to be about better people and creating aspiration for people to be better. And what better partner to work also with that down the road with Europe? You know, Europe is a place that's been trying to bring philosophy and the arts and technology together for many years, and they've been they have lots of experience with that. So it would be great to have a kind of collaboration on that. CMU has a number of examples. We have this Information and Communication Institute in Portugal. Of course, we're part of the Disney Research Labs, one in Carnegie Mellon, one in the UK, one in Switzerland. If we were to do a kind of media campus here in New York City, there will be potential collaborations with Media City out in the UK. And of course, just to wrap this thoughts up, there are some barriers here, and my colleagues brought them up. Right, there's a bottom line model. More and more education is moving to a bottom line model. So if we were to do this collaboration, Erasmus-based type of thing, all of a sudden we're sending students over into Europe. The European universities are now going to lose tuition from the government. So we have to figure this one out. We have to figure the resources out. I was very happy to hear about the Erasmus model. How about funding an Erasmus model across U.S. and Europe, and so that we don't have to worry about the tuition, we don't have to worry about the resources. And that also has to do with companies, right? The European companies don't have very good pipelines to our students. CMU works very, very much on the model of creating pipelines to companies. We don't have good pipelines to companies in Europe. An Erasmus program across the Atlantic could help very much. We would have to figure out what we're doing with the IP laws, of course. They're very different on some things. And just to finish with one thought here on, again, the idea of media getting together with big data. All right, so we've been talking a lot about how we get the data. What is the feedback loop that rewards people for giving good data, right? How do you create a tight feedback loop that rewards people who do that? How do you create an aspirational pipeline that I'm participating in this because it makes me better? I was talking to the head of Google at Pittsburgh, And he said to me, oh, we love the tech arts programs. And I said, well, why? Because it's going to help us this issue with how do people contribute good data. I'm like, well, who are you working with? He said, we have engineers, we have social scientists, and we're really going to crack this one. I said, you don't have any artists. He says, why would we need artists? I said, well, think about it. For centuries, the people that really have a model of how to get people to contribute good data is the arts, right? Try being a bad musician in a jazz quartet. You're not going to survive a long time. So I'll leave you with that thought, and thank you very much.
Hi, Peter Elias again. Thanasis in his presentation raised some important issues about the relationship between these different initiatives here in New York. And we've got three presentations we had, one from NYU CUSP, one from about Cornell Tech and the developments there, and of course Columbia. So my question is about competition and collaboration. You've all got millions of dollars. You've all got the kind of same sorts of goals in mind, which are to do with improving the lives of city dwellers. And you've all got ways in which you're conceptualizing that through data linkage, data analysis. Now, I guess that raises issues about the limited resources available here. Are you directly in competition with each other? And is that competition productive? In other words, are you simply going to be bidding up the salaries of top professorial thinking in this area? Or are you going to be competing for a small, finite group of potential graduate students, postdoctoral students, which might leave you a little bit bereft in terms of some of the scale of some of the programs that you have? Or are you really more involved in a collaboration, talking to each other about what are the areas where there is a degree of specialization that each of you has that you can then exploit and share with each other so that it becomes much more of a collaborative experience? Because I think the former, while competition is good in some respects, in other areas it can be pretty destructive. Whereas collaboration can be quite effective as long as it's done in such a way that it's not exclusive. Thank you.
So I think it's a great topic. So one thing I would say at the beginning, I mean, something we've thought about quite a bit at Cornell, is that we believe strongly that the scale of investment that's necessary in New York City to drive forward the information revolution here in New York is such that all of Cornell and NYU and Columbia, you know, beyond even the initiatives that each of us have here, and you know, Carnegie's new initiative with Steiner, that there's appetite and capacity here for more than all of those. So if you look, for example, at the Bay Area, which has a lot of technology investment by two large universities, Berkeley and Stanford, and you look at the size of the Bay Area economy, and you do the comparison here to New York, we could support, you know, Stanford and Berkeley level investments 3 times over here in New York City. And if you look at everything that we're doing here together, it's still a tiny fraction of what Stanford and Berkeley invest in these areas. So, you know, I think overall, the investment, even combined between all of us, is a drop in the bucket compared to what's needed. Now that said, coordination and collaboration is important. And you know, I think that one of the things that, while we're all talking about very similar areas here, that you also see is different scopes and different focal points, right? So, you know, is something driven by, you know, sort of the urban condition, which is, you know, one take on things? Is something really driven by the data science problems, but maybe considering the urban condition, which is another take? So I think you see complementary approaches here that, of course, will benefit from you know, continued conversation, collaboration, but I think that richness of approaches is really important.
Steve, you want to say something on that?
Yeah, so many of us in CUSP have grown up in a basic science atmosphere, which is fully collaborative, international. We've created collaborations, we benefited from them, participated in them, and so on. So it's not alien to us at all. However, I come back to 2 words I hope you took away from my brief remarks, and that is mission-driven. And you know, the question of cooperation versus competition really is the wrong question. The question is, does it help CUSP accomplish the mission? When it makes sense for us and our partners, absolutely. When it doesn't make sense, we won't do it. In other words, collaboration is a tool, not a means to an end. And I annoy a lot of academics when I say that, but the business folks get it instantly. And so that's the attitude that we've taken. I think it's what's let us move as rapidly as we have for the first 2 years. And I think it's what we'll continue with, because in the end, the question is, how do you get the mission done? I agree with Dan that the pool is enormous. It's both a big world out there in terms of people, and New York City is a very big place. And so I think there's room for a lot of activity, and where mutually beneficial, we'll seek cooperation.
Thanks. I'd like to just insert into that question, if we have other responses here. There's also the issue that we're talking about cities. We jumped into urban, and we started with something that's across the Atlantic. We're talking about a whole bunch of nations under this EU and the US. And in what way can we, working in cities, influence what happens across the Atlantic between countries? It's sort of presumed, but perhaps we can add some comment to that. And does that in fact take the kind of cooperation that maybe we're talking about through this mission, in order to influence countries? I mean, we're just cities. But anyone else have, Patricia, you want to say?
No, I just wanted to echo what Dan and Steve said, and just follow up on the educational aspect of this, and the question about whether we're just going to be competing for the same pool of graduate students. I do think the market out there is huge, and I think if you looked at each of the graduate offerings that we're developing, I think they're different enough to actually meet the needs of different student cohorts. So I actually don't think we're going to be feeding off each other's graduate students.
My one point to that, I think in most moments of significant cultural innovation, take Florence, for example, during the Renaissance, you had these cohorts of people who were both competing and collaborating. Raphael and Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo were competitors, but at the same time, they shared knowledge, right? So it's figuring out the uncomfortable, full of entropy model of collaboration and competition that makes cultural innovation possible. No better place to do it in New York City, because I agree with Dan, the cultural capital is huge. So of course we have to figure this one out. But without this high entropy of figuring out that loose network that allows both competition and collaboration, it's very hard to have cultural innovation. So I'm looking forward to it.
A lot of your different institutions are both interfacing with the corporate world and also taking government funds in different ways to pursue different programs. And one of the stories we saw recently out of the president's recovery program, he put a lot of money out there to different companies. Some of them failed, and there was a lot of drama around that, right? The way it used to be that the government supported free enterprise and science and entrepreneurism is they would give some money to some universities, some scientists would do some work, they would write some papers, and no one asked the question of did they make money or not. The scientists wrote papers, that was great, and later scientists, entrepreneurs would take that information and turn it into businesses, right? But now there's this world where government is giving money straight to business enterprises, and if they don't make money, everyone flips out. So I wonder, do you think that as you guys move more into this closer collaboration with companies and there is this need to generate profit and to show things are actually working as opposed to the old way of just you generated some good science and you wrote some papers, does that create a tension for you guys that's sort of dangerous for the academic side?
You may have seen, if you saw 60 Minutes 2 weeks ago, was involved, in fact, in the energy sector in helping to advise the government loan program. I think energy is particularly different, and that's in part why it's made news. Large capital investments, long time scale, commodity business, and so on. The kind of things we're mostly talking about here today are IT. IT is very different. It moves rapidly. The capital requirements are nowhere near as large. The investment timescales are a lot shorter. And so you'll see some government investment, but it can be done in lots of little chunks, and it pays off pretty quickly or not. And so I think it's just fundamentally different, and I don't think it's changed very much. I see Dan is about ready to say something.
Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
So again, I think this is another great question and area for thought and discussion. I think the bigger challenge here is the challenge of shying away from these possible failures. We need to change the way that we work and the way that we do technology development. Academic institutions and governments tend to be both are incredibly conservative organizations and tend to shy away from both conflict and failure. Successful businesses embrace conflict rather than shying away from it. They don't embrace failure because, you know, you want to succeed. I think in early stage companies, failure is a recognized cost of really being competitive. But the incredible allergy to conflict in both the academic and the government sectors, I think is a huge impediment to the commercialization of new technological results. And in some ways, the U.S. may be a little further along than, say, Europe on, dealing with those allergies, but there's a huge way for us to go. And so I think the big risk is that the things that we aspire to do here that are flying in the face of this reaction of everything has to be success, there can't be any conflict, will get mired in the mud, not the other side that will do some things that that have conflict of interest in them or that have failures.
So I'd like to add
As you can tell, I have a strong
another dimension to the commercialization, and that is one of the things that we're working on strongly here in terms of innovation that can be adopted by companies that exist already, and then the spin out of companies and new innovations, entrepreneurship. But I remember 5 years ago going to a meeting in London about the formation of something called global corporate venturing. And basically there were 50 companies saying, we've put all this money into funds to fund venture capital for the last 15 years, and look at the terrible performance. We wanted access to new technology early on, and we wanted some profits out of that. And we didn't get either really significantly. So this organizational forum was formed, and many of the companies said, let's now try again to have our own venturing arms within our companies. We'll pool monies within our companies. We'll have people then do the venturing, make sure we have access, and perhaps we'll also focus more. We'll be able to get some returns on our investment. That's now almost 5,000 companies, okay? So I remember giving the keynote, a little bit bigger audience than this, and now it's huge. Just recently, that relates more to what we're talking about in London. This is several months ago. A similar organization was formed with regard to universities. It's called Global University Venturing. And there it was actually in London, but we had several universities from this side as well of the Atlantic. And the issue was, look what we have to worry about. Less money from governments. We're talking about competition for students. They said less money from governments. Tuitions are up. How are we going to bring in students? We now have the internet, Coursera, and this company and that company, et cetera, providing education over the internet. What a challenge that is for us, et cetera. So the pool of complaints that flowed in, I said, look, if you were a company, I would say reinvent yourself. And that's what we're starting to talk about here. Reinvent yourself and understand, what your constituency is. And if, in fact, one suggestion is to begin to set up your own venturing efforts, promote entrepreneurism, train your students who are interested on how to do that. And then when you have intellectual property and stuff that comes out of the campus and out of the efforts and research at the campus, capitalize on it. Don't just take royalties off of patents, which may or may not be executed properly and may never come, but take equity. Just think. Name 10 companies that you think came off of stuff that happened at your campus, and if you had equity in them, what would that mean? You'd have enough money to support more efforts like this. You could lower tuition maybe. You could pay more to your faculty. A lot of things could happen. So that happened now 3 or 4 months ago. We had about 12 or 14 universities involved, significant universities, and we're in the hundreds now. So another thing to watch. So there are many issues here to talk about how we can cooperate and how we can begin to afford the resources that we need to have an impact. Yeah.
It's really wonderful to see these academic initiatives really in this tremendous city. Universities are, obviously they're built to compete with one another, and also another feature of universities is that they really evolve at a glacial pace. And it seems to me that this is a great opportunity. I come from the Bell Labs culture, and their collaboration happened because of competition. So I believe that as the right problems emerge, and people use the same data or compete, quote unquote, on the same data, I think tremendous collaborations can actually happen because of this concentration of tremendous talent in one place. The question I have, though, and it hasn't come up, and somehow we've been concerned with this a great deal around Boston. We talk about sharing, we talk about big data. In the end, none of our institutions, whether commercial or academic, are going to have the computational resources to truly, really deal with the rapid increase in data, where at least the cost would really require sort of making choices that we prefer not to make. So it seems to me that, and I want to phrase this more as a question, has this group of institutions that are going to live in this, in close proximity, thought about building common infrastructure? And by common infrastructure is not just simply sharing computing, but also really thinking about how will this data be stored, shared, manipulated together in a way that sort of points to what I think the future of this is going to be. All of this big data is going to become, and computation will become, utilities. And everything else we've heard today would be built on top of this. It seems to me that there is an opportunity. We did this in Boston, which is really a place where the collaboration gene is completely missing. There's absolutely no question. It's one of the greatest concentrations of academic talent, and yet there is very little collaboration. I mean, there is collaboration sort of bottom up, but you will rarely see institutions coming together to collaborate on any project.
Steve, you want to take that on?
So, not all data is equal. As we try to build, even within CUSP, which involves the academics and the corporates and the government, there are issues. Right? No doubt we will clean up, make interoperable the open New York City data, and very likely make that available to the world. You start to get into the proprietary city data. You start to get into corporate data that's held, sort of their own data that we generate. Very difficult to make that a utility. There's an overlay on every data set. Who owns it? What are you allowed to correlate it with? Who will give you access to it, and so on. And I frankly don't see a real way around that other than to have that interlocking matrix of access. With respect to cycles, which is a much easier thing to talk about, we have very deliberately shied away from big iron in CUSP. We have a small on-site IT facility, but we have partners, Microsoft with its cloud services, and the national laboratories, which, to use a physics term I know you understand, is essentially the infinite compute frame. And so I'm not cycle limited at all. I'm much more idea and data limited.
So one thing I just wanted to underscore there is I think the iron right now that's the most effective is the iron that Amazon and Google and Microsoft and IBM are building. There was an era when universities needed to build their own iron. I think now we need the smarts to use the incredibly scalable stuff that's out there, and those industry partners seem interested in working with us so we can do it in cost-effective ways also.
I want to add two things to that. I think so I couldn't agree with Steve more. Not all data is equal. So, and what Dan said, why are we adding universities to the mix? Well, sometimes just throwing technology at problems is actually the wrong thing to do. My work is in rehabilitation, right? So they've been built rehabilitation technologies for years. Still, the number one factor for somebody being able to be rehabilitated is the behavior of the partner, not the technologies. So maybe what we need to do more is actually create people who believe in partnership, in sickness and in health, rather than throwing more and more and more rehabilitation technology. So there is a kind of like, let's grab all the data from Facebook. Why? You know, people are telling us they're going to the bathroom. Let's try and create better data rather than creating more data. So there are some humanist questions that can actually begin to create really meaningful lives and meaningful data, therefore decreasing a lot of the noise in the data. So more sensors, why? Meaningful sensors, right? So part of it, I agree with Dan, part of it, the universities are coming to ask the right questions, not to do the iron. The iron is there, people are going to build it, but we can ask the right questions, which could actually decrease the data to focus on the meaningful data rather than just creating more and more noise.
Thank you.
Can I just say that these were exactly the arguments we heard at the beginning when we built the high-performance computing center in Boston. We don't need it, right? I completely agree with all of you. You need to think carefully about what the meaning of the data is, and for some people, what some of us know big data means is actually really little data. I mean, they're just becoming involved in data, and there's very little data really on the scale we're talking about. Nevertheless, ultimately, the reason this high-performance computing center was built in Boston is because when you actually look at the amount of money we each invest in the infrastructure and running this infrastructure, you actually find that you save a lot by collaborating, and you can put that savings into precisely the kinds of things you're talking about.
Yeah, and I didn't mean actually just to I forgot the second part of my answer, I'm sorry. So when I was talking about like, let's have a joint media campus, right? How many large-scale, decision simulators can you build in New York? You can't. You can build one, and the standards have the space, and if we all build together, and you don't need it all the time.
That's
so I couldn't
exactly
agree with you more. There comes a point of cost, right, where you have to have common infrastructure. But I'm also saying that in terms of big data, let's just keep growing the data. It's not the way to do it. So there comes a point, of course, where collaboration is critical, but there's also other approaches to deal with it.
And let me just say that this issue of utility, I mean, it's interesting because, again, we've had similar conversations in Boston. You bring the financial sector together, okay? Obviously, all of these companies compete with one another. And yet they're interested in building a cloud that's in some sense owned together because, first of all, the cybersecurity issues can be addressed by building the infrastructure in a qualitatively different way. And of course, you then need to think about how this utility really, what are the rules for using this utility, in a group of people where you want to continue competing, and there's certain data that's not completely open. So the reason I'm raising these questions is because my belief is, again, that ultimately economics is going to sort of force, and not just economics, but the state-of-the-art technology is going to sort of force these conversations. And at least on the academic side, it's useful to have them earlier rather than later, even if the decision ultimately is not to adopt them.
Okay, I think we've run out of time, but I'd like to ask, I guess our host will tell us where we go from here so we can be heard further beyond just these conversations. Okay.
Well, thanks very much. And just, I suppose, a couple of comments I would have is that I think Patricia's point on the shared resources and potentially the funding, either shared funding or funding to enable these shared resources to be developed, I think is central, and I think would be a litmus test in how collaborative science can be done. And just you anticipated a question I was going to ask, and I just will add a comment: is that what does the infrastructure look like? And I suppose my perspective in asking that question is, of course, influenced by what's going on in Europe with these SV roadmap things. You've got the biobank and SKA and stuff. They are very physical infrastructures, and about the SKA, when they switch it on in the first 2 hours, it can collect more data in 2 hours than is on the internet. So how does that work? And that's an enormous, I think, positive challenge when you remember it's going to be done in Africa. And I think this perspective, we're talking transatlantic here, but I think transatlantic is, I suppose, ultimately sort of an artificial environment. You really have to look at this in purely global terms. And I think my takeaway from today, amongst other things, will be that I think that the city context, the urban context for science, the data context within that, and I think what I've seen in terms of the description of and demonstration of collaboration here is hugely important. And very practically, what I would like to do is be able to take those to the Transatlantic Forum, through the Transatlantic Forum to the TTIP process and put it on the table. Say, there, guys, well, that's what's going on. There are drivers here. There are broadly societal challenges are being addressed. Arguably, without this process, we aren't going to be able to address those challenges and all that means in terms of science, in terms of technology. Behind that, a point I sometimes make is you referred to the various companies who are enabling the research that you're doing today, and I recognise the names. They're in County Carlow and Tipperary and Dublin. So it's time for the policymakers, the regulators, and the legislators to get behind the guys who are driving back to the Henry Ford thing. It's going ahead. So I do think that technology and innovation can never be looked at in isolation. Clearly, the world champions available and present in New York and under New York City's tutelage and sponsorship in the widest sense of that word, I think can provide a global demonstration. I think that's where, arguably, again, the relationship with Europe can be enabled. By that I mean, again, arguably the US programs maybe are slightly more closed, the European ones are open. So let's look at that context and see how can that be exploited. And I think that can be exploited very, very immediately in terms of opportunities to present some of the ideas that are being ventilated here as Horizon 2020 programs or projects. So next steps, as I mentioned, the submission to teach process. And I think what we'll do is we'll assemble inputs from today and bring that to the negotiators. And they've asked us for that evidence, and I think we'll provide it as evidence. Related to that, looking at Horizon 2020, and again, you may be familiar with this, but the program was launched in December, 7 years. It's a fundamental difference between the EU and US programs is the EU stuff is multi-annual. It obtains for 7 years. The money doesn't go away. And the US, as far as I understand it, it's annualized, compete on an annualized basis. Again, one of the differences, and I believe one of the attractions for longer term funding. Simplified funding mechanism. Very simply, what that says is that the European Union has been accused of being slow. I was with the guy who's going to organise this, and he said, yes, we will give decisions within 80 days. So, and they've actually set up a different agency to whip them into shape. So I do believe that will happen, and clearly that will make a huge difference. My organisation, actually, we're going to a kick-off meeting for a project which we submitted 3 years ago. So you actually forget what was it about, So I think that's going to be a vast improvement. No system is perfect, but I think again the reason I don't have a problem with the 2-year thing is because you're going to be doing it for 3 or 4 or 5 years, so it does obtain for a long time. The program itself, again, you may be familiar with these objectives: excellence in science, industrial leadership, societal challenges. I think the change here is that the previous framework programs, sort of 1 to 8, were quite prescriptive. Sort of, we would like you to do this. And broadly speaking, very simply put, the Commission come along and say, well, actually, we don't know what we get. It was reference to impact here and patents. And one thing the framework program does not produce is patents. So that's not going to be an outcome. So in that sense, I present it as a very actually social and distributed model, because the thing that stuff is funded, you produce your report at the end of it, and sort of away you go. But the emphasis this time will be on impact and through interdisciplinarity and collaboration. So it's very, very and extremely open. The global dimension to this is up there. The commissioners, and everybody driving the program has been very explicit in their commitment that this will be a global program to address global challenges. And I highlight that because I think it does present the opportunity to advance some of the excellent ideas that are presented here. The excellence in science is more or less that. You've got the European Research Council, you've got the FET, the Future and Emerging Technologies, the Marie Curie Actions, and the research infrastructures. And they've all come from different parts of the framework program, over different framework programs. But I think finally there is now a logic between them all. So not new, but the relationship between each and how they're managed is new. The industrial leadership, Pillar 2, hugely important. And I think it's fair to say that the European Commission was quite sort of schizophrenic in terms of the role of industry. Amongst other things, I think what's driven that is the Americans. And you'll see sometimes, I think if you came to Brussels for the launch of Horizon 2020, you would have thought it was a Microsoft program. They were just all over it like a disease. And why? Very simply because, in my interpretation, these US multinationals, they understand the benefit of the program, and they understand the benefit of the program is not the money. The benefit of the program is the access to knowledge, networks, know-how, and all that stuff that the program brings by that cartload. And that's why you see the Intel's with their 127 projects, and the Microsofts, I don't know the number, but very, very strong leadership there from US and indeed European companies, because they understand that the benefits there can be hugely important to how they address challenges. Health, food, energy, transport, climate. This one, I'm still not sure if I get, but inclusive, innovative, and reflective societies. But I think it's sort of a catch-all, and of course, security. But I think those are, if you look at these headings compared to frameworks previous, you see, gosh, these people have been sort of smoking some good stuff, Very, very open, very distributed, and I think that is why you will see with the framework program next that it's going to be far more bottom up, and that is also reflected in the calls. They're not annual calls. There's the first batch for which obtained the calls published in 2013 will cover the period to 2015, and then there will be 4-year type programs launched on the basis of the ideas and suggestions and projects that they threw up. So I think quite a different approach, and a much more stand-back approach from the point of view of the Commission. And you also see that funding has been increased, and it's the first, I think it's the only EU program that has received an increase in funding. US participation. Just on a point of information, the program is open to US participants. You may have come across a debate about, the European Union does in addition provide funding. There is a part of the program which provides funding to US entities only in the health area. But in addition to that, and apart from that, it's open to all researchers in the US. And of course, there's huge sympathy indeed in terms of cooperation, collaboration with the US. Transfer of funds depends on participation being deemed essential to the project, and funding is provided under, so fairly straightforward. Just on that point, I mentioned earlier, there are established priorities under the S&T cooperation agreement between the EU and US, but what I and others would argue for is a policy level basis which would address, such as joint funding, intellectual property. They are not addressed within the current framework of the S&T cooperation agreement, mainly because it's a mechanic process, it's not a policy process. TTIP is the forum for that. The specific calls, I think that's fairly straightforward there. ICT, hugely important, sustainable healthcare, and aging well and better, and dealing with hyper-aging, as I believe it's currently referred to, better security and privacy, and a lower carbon economy and intelligent transport. But I think there are some things you're familiar with, and I think I won't go through them at this stage, but leave that with you. This information will be available online, but I think in summary what I would say is that we would look to take the two panels here, use them as presentations and submissions to the TTIP process. We will consult through the good offices of Mike Holland in doing that, to make sure that we have a synthesis document that everyone's happy with going forward. Practically then we'd look at the submission emanating from those in terms of Horizon 2020, and I'll be proposing through Michael again practically how we do that, but I would look for some form of online brainstorming to come up with some of those ideas that could go forward to Horizon 2020. And with that I would say thank you all very much. In particular, thank Michael for his prescience in allowing us to come here and talk to you. It was very nice to hear and indeed meet some of you. My own personal view is that I think there's enormous scope for increased and further collaboration. I think this Erasmus, EU-US Erasmus, is exactly the sort of thing you could write. I will indeed write to an MEP on Monday, and I'm going to say put it into Congress and you see what happens. But that sort of activity doesn't happen, and that's the sort of thing that the forum that I think we need to be exploiting. It is a democracy, and let's use it to our benefit. Thank you very much.
On behalf of Steve and Tess, I'd like to thank everyone.